A warm welcome to this inaugural Scot-Secure West Summit. It's like the Scot-Secure East Summit, but more people smile here. If you can just check that your mobile phones and any other electronic devices are set to silent, please. The toilets, you probably know where they are already, but they're located on every floor. The nearest is at the back of the exhibition area. There are no fire alarms scheduled for today. If the alarm sounds, please make your way to the nearest fire doors. I've got one of the venue things here, which made me laugh. It says, the events team will assist in the building evacuation. If by assist you mean run out first, yes, that's absolutely true. Just follow them and you'll be all right. All catering will take place in foyer to the exhibition area, and if you have specific dietary requirements, you've probably advised the organisers of that already. Just ask somebody and they will bring the right food to you, okay? Now, before we continue with the meat of the thing, please welcome to the stage Ray Bug, Director and Founder of Digit.
It's the first time I've been in one of these lecture theatre type venues to do one of our events. It's very, very odd seeing you all up there. Can you hear me at the back? Do I need to move this up a little bit? Just a quick word from me. First and foremost, this is our 10th Scot-Secure. We've done 9 in Edinburgh. This is our first one in Glasgow. Next year is the 10th anniversary of the series of events, and it's just great to see another packed audience here in Glasgow, so welcome. And those of you that are with us at dinner last night in the Ivy, glad to see you're all here as well, apart from one who I'll be speaking to when he drags his sorry carcass through the door later today. I'm just going to give a very, very quick thank you to our sponsors and also tell you a little bit about some of the incentives that they're offering today. Headline sponsors today is SentinelOne. Our co-sponsors, Bitdefender, Droplet, Barrier, CrowdStrike, Silva, Cloud, Fortinet and TechForce, and a whole host of supporting exhibitors too. They are the people that fund the entire day. We don't have a ticket price for end users. We never have done. We never will do. So to sort of give a little bit back, give the exhibitors a couple of minutes of your time over the day. They are sucking you in with some prizes as well today. For example, TechForce. I know that obviously as IT folk, there's probably the vast majority of you that are Lego fans. Am I right? So TechForce have got a mini Yoda Lego. I was going to do the Yoda voice, but I'm not going to bother. And a Mandalorian helmet, whatever the hell that is. So there's a Mandalorian helmet and a mini Yoda that you can just go and drop your card or have your badge scanned and you'll be entered into the prize draw. And they will be drawn today. So if you go into any of the raffles, they're drawn today. You may not get the prize today, but the draw will be done today. Silva Cloud, loads of hoodies. Nintendo Switch at Barrier Networks. You've got to do a round of Mario Kart though. So that's a competition. So if there's any Mario Kart fans, go to Barrier. There's a few people nodding there, looking very confident with themselves. Go to Barrier, have a race. You might win the Switch at the end of the day. Scotland IS, seed pots. Not going to say any more, just go to Scotland IS and you'll know what that is. Arctic Wolf have got a Wonderboom speaker. SentinelOne are raffling an iPad. Sistal have got a bottle of Pink Moe, and Cloudflare are raffling a Johnny Walker experience for 2. So an event in Glasgow, you've got to win a prize and go to Edinburgh. So very, very generous things. On behalf of myself and my team, thank you to the team. Great organisation as per usual, great venue. And to all of you, have a great day. Thanks very much.
Ray's missed out on the most important thing. I mean, forget the mini Yoda and the Mandalorian helmet. TechForce are offering plastic swords. I'm sure I saw someone carrying one in at some stage. You said, who had the plastic swords? Somebody came in with 2 of them. Yeah, hang it up. Lift it up so they can see. Now, we'll be seeing. We'll be organising competitions at lunchtime. Last man standing wins, or woman, come to that. Cybersecurity is one of those things that every organisation, every industry, every business thinks is a really, really good idea without necessarily wanting the faff of having to pay for it. Now that produces a budget deficit, and it's almost universal. What can actually be done about that? Our first speaker, Maxine Holt, is Senior Research Director at Omdia. She wants to talk about the attention that cybersecurity is currently getting. It's not always good, and what we can actually do about it. So, Maxine.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for having me here today. It's really great to be at an in-person event again, so thank you. So yeah, today, noted on the speaker, thank you. I don't do very well at standing still, so I've been told to carry this around with me. So today, as Mark said, I'm going to talk to you about cybersecurity, the fact that it has so much attention on it today, but probably not enough budget to be able to deal with everything. So, my name is Maxine Holt. I lead the Omdia cybersecurity research team. I've worked in IT more years than I care to remember. I've worked in cyber for coming up for 10 years now, and I can't imagine ever going back to just IT. So to dig into what I'm going to talk about in a little more detail today, sorry, I'll have to move forward a bit because I can't see the screen very well without my glasses. So cybersecurity under the microscope, the challenges that the cybersecurity function faces. And then I'm going to have to give in my apologies and put the glasses on. At least I knew where they were. Secondly, looking at the expansive cybersecurity landscape. So it's a really complex world. It's not just one thing. So we'll talk about that as well. And then looking at return on security investment, kind of the standard return on investment calculations are really poor for cybersecurity because, of course, the best outcome is that nothing happens. So those are the three things that I'm going to be talking about today. I just want to add, before I get into the detail, that I'll be referring to 3 Omdia surveys today. The first one is the Omdia Horizon survey. We surveyed around 800 organisations earlier this year, towards the end of Q1, early Q2, and that was buy side and sell side to ask them for their insights into IT and a range of questions there. The second one is IT Enterprise Insights. So we surveyed during 2Q and 3Q last year around 5,000 organisations globally for their insights across a range of IT, and cybersecurity was rolled into that. We asked them for their views relevant to the end of the current year, so end of 23. And then, last but by no means least, our cybersecurity decision maker survey that we conducted in the second quarter of this year, dedicated to the cybersecurity buyers, and we surveyed around 600 organisations, and we do that in that time frame because we surfaced the results at Black Hat just last month. Okay, so cybersecurity under the microscope, it really does have intense scrutiny in organisations. And, there are regular headlines in the news. There are new attack techniques all the time. And, there's attempted breaches all the time. There's staffing shortages. It's really difficult to get the right people in the right place for cybersecurity. But organisations have to be continuously available despite these challenges. It's a real challenge for organisations because, yes, they've got to be continuously available, but they also have to be able to innovate and develop and build new products and services for their customers, their citizens, their patients. And I view it very much as kind of a carrot and a stick view. So I'll probably start with the stick. The stick is about prevention, about not having cyber attacks, not having to deal with the cyber attacks. And then the carrots are the digital opportunities that I've just mentioned, the opportunity to innovate, develop, and move the organisation forward. And this is the scrutiny that I think cybersecurity is under. We're expected to be secure. It's almost as if I think cybersecurity is a commodity. It's viewed as a commodity, but it's a really difficult commodity to deliver. So this is the first survey that I mentioned, the Horizons survey. And we asked the question about the business and IT challenges that the tech industry should address as a priority. And you can see here that cybersecurity is the clear winner leader. I don't know that you can ever be a winner as a top priority to address. But it's good news because there is recognition amongst both the buy side and the sell side that cybersecurity is a huge issue and something that should be addressed. Why do we think it's up here? Well, I think we've had a lot of digital innovation. Yes, a lot happened over the COVID period as organisations had to reinvent themselves, but it's been going on a long time. 10, 15 years probably. And I think that we haven't been paying the same attention to cybersecurity as we have been to our innovation approaches at organisations. So this recognition that cybersecurity is at the top of the things to address is really good news, I feel. It's really good news, but we now need to turn that recognition into action. So organisations want to avoid the headlines. These are just some example headlines. I updated this slide just at the end of last week for Pete. And, I could, if I'm being perfectly honest, I could create a slide like this every day, and every day it would look at least a little bit different. And that's because, there are so many breaches. They're frequently headline news. And yes, it can impact the organisations significantly. It impacts individuals significantly as well. I was talking to Daniel earlier about a breach that my daughter had suffered. So, it impacts individuals. It takes a lot of time and effort to resolve. And I think overall, when we look at this slide, organisations really want to avoid being the subject of the next headline. But why do they want to do that? What's so important? Well, I think it's trust. We want organisations want to be trusted by their customers, by their partners, by their suppliers, so that they can, basically anywhere that they engage, so that they can all work together. And I think trust is made up of any number of components. Subjective, I'm sure we could stand here and talk all day about what trust actually means. But we can take share price for publicly quoted companies. Share price is one example of trust. And we can see impacts on share price, even if only temporarily, perhaps for 12 months or so. But there is an impact on the organisation there. And kind of measuring trust isn't always tangible. It can be based on perception and feelings and what we read on headlines such as, excuse me, such as those that are in the background there right now. So I very much feel that we should do, as organisations, in all of our organisations, we should do with data that's held by our company the same as we would expect other companies to do with data that's held about us. I want to be able to trust the organisations that I do business with. So to move on to the IT Enterprise Insights Survey, this is the kind of 5,000-ish respondents. We asked respondents for their top 3 IT trends. So again, focusing very much on IT. Hopefully you can see at the top here, and you will have a copy of the slides made available afterwards, so you better look in more detail. But hopefully you can see at the top that the management of security, identity and privacy is the leading IT trend, which is good news. Again, it's good news. There's recognition that that is something that's really, really important. I think there's 2 aspects to this. Compliance. Compliance absolutely has to come into the equation here. We're seeing more and more organisations look at or be subject to maybe it's GDPR or whatever else. I can give the example of TikTok. TikTok was fined just short of £13 million earlier this year. Probably a drop in the ocean to a company the size of TikTok, but nevertheless, that is a significant amount of money that is going to draw the attention of boards. But it's more than a stick. It's about this trust, again, that I think is really, really important. That doesn't just matter to private organisations, public sector, not-for-profit. They all want their customers, their citizens, their patients, etc., to trust them. And it's kind of this combination, I think, of trust and compliance that's driving the top IT trend. But we shouldn't forget the second one on the list here, and that's the creation of digital capability. And we do not see at Omdia any let-up in the desire to innovate and do more within the organisation to remain and become ever more persistently relevant to their customers. So it's just so important that we cannot think of cybersecurity on its own. We really have to think about the fact that the organisation wants to continue to innovate, and we want to be able to do that in a secure environment. So moving on to the Cybersecurity Decision Makers Survey, this is directed specifically at security decision makers. We asked them what their views were in terms of the top security challenges for their organisation. And you can see here, hopefully, that the top is very much the staffing and skills shortage. Really interesting for me to see that. Closely followed, I think, by ransomware attacks and supporting transformative projects. Last year, transformative projects, supporting those projects was top. That was the biggest issue. It's kind of good-ish to see that that's not right up at the top right now. Maybe, you know, there's been more attention paid to cybersecurity as these projects have developed nowadays. But I think it's, you know, all of these top three are very closely related because, you know, we need staff with the right skills to be able to protect and defend against ransomware attacks and ensure that the organization's security posture is as strong as it can be to support the innovation that we want to do. And I think that this is kind of the crux of you know, the maximum attention, minimum budget piece, is that the security function doesn't have its only role as protecting the organisation anymore. It really is about enabling the organisation to innovate and develop. We ran the same survey last year. I just wanted to highlight the kind of the movers and the shakers, if you will, from last year. Excuse me. So going up by 5% or more was the staffing and skills shortages, so that's obviously top right now. Also, insider threat and employee security training, a huge challenge for organisations because I really do not like the term people are the weakest link. You know, untrained people can be the weakest link, but they're really not the weakest link on their own. So that's still a challenge for the security function. And then moving down a bit, I was kind of quite surprised by addressing geopolitical impact. Moving down, feel very much as though, you know, geopolitical issues have become almost business as usual to deal with. And then budget. Budget was quite surprising as well, but we found that 85% of organisations have actually got an increase in their cybersecurity budget this year, which is great news for the sponsors of this event and great news for CISOs and their teams as well, but it's still not enough. That has always been caveated by any CISO I've spoken with who said, yeah, but we still need more. We still need more money, so they still have to be measured with their spending. So now we've seen why cyber's under the microscope. I want to look at the extent of the challenges. And I've kind of mentioned this already, that cybersecurity isn't just one thing. So we developed Omdia, we developed the cybersecurity ecosystem based on the premise that information security, been around for thousands of years, is very much focused on protecting the confidentiality, integrity and availability of information. Cybersecurity is a subset of that, is focused on protecting the CIA of digital information. So we've got the organisation and its data at its core, knowing of course that the data is scattered about all over the place. We surround that with a layer of data security. That is far more than protection. You need to discover your data, you need to govern it appropriately, and then you can protect it. That's not enough, so we surround that with a layer of identity, authentication and access, so knowing that who or what is coming in to access the data in your organisation should indeed are who they say they are and indeed should have access to that data. Surrounded then by a layer of infrastructure security, so securing your IT infrastructure on-prem, in the cloud and everything that comes in between that. Then a layer of SecOps dealing with the day-to-day issues, but then it's just not about the tech that we can have there as well. We really need to think about this extended ecosystem, the people that need access to the data and the information. So people like employees, yeah, absolutely, permanent, temporary employees, but also your customers, your partners, your suppliers, who need access to little bits of information that you have within your organisation. The easiest example being probably banking information via your banking app on your phone. And then, excuse me, we also need to think about the influences on cybersecurity. So cybersecurity does not stand alone. We have governance, we have risk, we have compliance influencing what the cybersecurity function does. A good example being GDPR. That's not necessarily a security responsibility, but the implementing the controls to manage GDPR is often. And then on the other side, people, process and technology. Tech is amazing, but it's not enough to secure an organisation. You need controls built with people and process as well. So, you know, why do we need so many layers of security? And we need digital resilience. At Omdia, we define digital resilience as what it says on the screen here, to continuously operate and quickly leverage digital opportunities. So to be secure and to be able to develop the organization. So why do we need resilience? We need to serve our customers. We need to keep our doors open. We need to develop new and exciting products and services for our customers. There are a number of components of digital resilience. One of them, of course, is cyber resilience. And at Omdia, we define that as, again, as you can see on the screen, ensuring that an organization can continuously operate despite security challenges. I think security mature organizations know that there are these challenges, they recognize these challenges, but we must be able to manage them and support the organization in its digital resilience. Because if we can't provide our organizations with cyber resilience, then they can't serve customers well. Can I just have a quick time check, Mark, please? Okay, thank you. So, back to the cybersecurity decision maker survey. We asked a question about what the severity of the security issues are that are faced by organizations. The standout overall statistic for me from this pie chart that you can see on the screen here is that 92% of organizations have dealt with multiple security incidents and breaches over the previous year. I'll probably argue that the 8% haven't found them yet, but you know, definitely the 92% for me is a headline. On top of that, the 47% of the overall number that have had severe incidents requiring meaningful escalation. And I think that's to do with the pace of digital innovation. I mentioned from the Omdia Horizon survey at the beginning, where we got cybersecurity as the top issue. And you know, it's a real eye-opener, I think, for those that are not in cybersecurity to see that 92% number. It's not personal. You know, the attackers are constantly scanning environments, as we're all aware, and they find the lowest hanging fruit, of course. So, you know, there is a little bit of good news. We asked this same question last year, and to look at the movers and shakers, we've seen an increase in the number of organizations that have had several security mishaps with limited impact. But the good news, that's countered with a decrease in the number of organizations with numerous security mishaps. So I think really that the minor incidents are becoming less frequent. But overall, the 47% has not changed from last year. So, excuse me, to bring together the enterprise challenges, for sure, cyber attacks remain front and center, as you can see from the diagram here, but there are other forces at play. So the intervention, the compliance piece that I mentioned, whether it's industry regulation, government legislation, we absolutely have to be able to deal with that, and there is a lot more down the pipe as well. And then the innovation piece, I've talked a lot about the continued innovation that we're seeing. And that demands resilience. You know, we have to be able to deal with cyber attacks. We have to be able to keep the digital lights on. It's really important for organizational resilience. So we're seeing more attention being paid to this for sure. So given that the standard ROI equation hasn't worked for organizations, I mentioned that right up front, you know, that nothing happens, you know, we've seen a lot more turn to the return on security investment, Rosie, to build the case for investment in cybersecurity. So return on security investment is typically based on risk, prioritization, and organizational objectives. There are two outcomes. Desired outcomes. The first is that investment is focused on the areas of highest priority, of course, and then secondly, that the organization can innovate and potentially use its security posture to even, and I would use this word in brackets, but competitive advantage. Not everybody's into, it's not always about competition, but you know, if you've got innovation there, you can do better, you can do more. And that innovation piece, of course, is the opportunity, the carrot side of the seesaw, if you will, on here. And investment in security could result in the organisation being more competitive in the market. Walmart's a good example here. So Walmart, US-based organisation, I'm sure many of you are familiar with. They've invested tens of millions of dollars over the last decade or so in cybersecurity, but they don't try and position themselves as the world's most secure retailer, which is just like a red flag. It's much more about the world's most trusted retailer. So it is very much about trust. They've built their security in part to be able to deal with the trust element. And then we've got the stick side of the balance, attack prevention, compliance. Without enough investment, the organisation is at greater risk of cyber attacks, other breaches, and so on and so forth. It's a really tough balancing act for CISOs. So to build return on security investment, we need to know what risks the organisation's facing. I'm sure many of you in here are familiar with the standard risk equation. I'm just going to run through it very briefly so we're all on the same page. So we think about the threat in the first instance. Maybe it's ransomware, maybe it's developers putting data in the cloud and not securing it properly, whatever. So we look at the likelihood or probability of that happening, and then we independently or separately look at the impact on the organisation of that threat actually materialising. Those two are typically on the same scale. I've used 1 to 5 before, 1 to 10. You multiply those two together, and then you come up with your identified risk. And you can determine the outcome based on the organisation's risk appetite. So you would decide to accept the risk, you would decide to mitigate the risk with security controls, or you'd transfer perhaps to an insurance provider. So we need to translate this cyber risk equation, this is what the security mature organisations are doing, into the language of the business. And I often think about risks that we take in everyday life. So I crossed the road to get to here today from the hotel I stayed at last night. I didn't even think of it as a risk decision. I crossed the road, that was fine. But then another risk decision might be base jumping off a mountain in Switzerland. That is a serious risk consideration, one that I know my risk appetite doesn't have. And all organisations have this risk appetite, and the risk appetite is dynamic as well. So it's not something that you would set your risk appetite on the 1st of January, and by the 31st of December, it's still exactly the same. Things happen, things change, things evolve. So it's really, really important to be aware of dynamic risk, and also that the security function has to be flexible to support this for the organisation. So the reality is that no organisation has cases full of money to spend. Yes, the budgets have gone up, but they still don't have enough. So they want to know how best to spend the budget that they've got available. They need to understand the risk to be able to prioritise. We've just discussed how to determine that risk. And those organisations that are getting the best value from security investments know where to prioritise their spend and translate that spend into business outcomes, being able to secure the organisation and be able to innovate. We also have the 3 areas of cybersecurity that we talk about at Omdia. We've got the preventative era, kind of the antivirus type stuff, preventing the known bad from coming in. We have the reactive stuff, which is typically wrapped up in your detection and response type stuff, the SecOps play. And then the proactive security, which is looking out for potential gaps in your security posture, plugging them and continuously improving your posture. And I think, a lot of organisations certainly focus on providing and enabling this continuous security protection so that they're resilient and they're adaptive to the needs of their customers. So balancing the priorities, back to the seesaw for the final time, you'll be pleased to know that there's very much been an evolution. As I said, I've worked in cyber for coming up for 10 years now, and it's such a different place to where I started working all those years ago. It was very much a tick box exercise in those days. It really isn't today. It's continuous management of the cyber environment for sure. And this resilience is so important. Resilience for the business requires resilience for cybersecurity. We have to balance the opportunity for the organisation in terms of innovation with the cyber risks that we're prepared to take. Sometimes we will have to take cyber risks, but we must ensure that the priorities are addressed with cybersecurity, and we're keeping that balance. So I'm nearly at the end now, but for me, everything comes together in this diagram here. It's a really simple diagram, but what I'm aiming to highlight here is that cyber doesn't exist as a centre of excellence. It's not an ivory tower, of course. It is a key component of managing and sustaining the organisation. It supports customers, as you can see here. It supports the delivery of products and services, both front end and the back end as well. We can't make everything beautiful on the front end and have a rubbish back end as well. So, as cybersecurity professionals, we're continuously reinforcing that cyber is a core component of the business, which, when it's enabled by the right investments, it will support the organisation in supporting its customers. The organisation is resilient and it's innovative. So this is just a very brief summary. I'll leave you to read those afterwards, but just to reiterate, if I had one thing, choose just one thing for you to take away from today, it's this final point, that the organisation can't survive without solid basic cyber hygiene, being able to manage security incidents and breaches. It can't thrive without a strong focus on cybersecurity to enable innovation, the organisation to move forward. And cybersecurity really is a key component of managing and sustaining the organisation. That's it from me. Thank you very much. I shall now hand you back to Mark.
Thank you very much, Maxine. There will be an opportunity to put questions to any of our first three speakers this morning at the end of this session. And I think we're also doing it on Slido, so if you haven't actually downloaded that as yet, there's still time to do that. Our next speaker is Daniel Cuthbert, Global Head of Cybersecurity Research at Banco Santander, talking about his war on bugs. So, Daniel.
Thank you. That's really hard to come after Maxine with her very professional slides. Mine look like my children did them, but I'm going to use the fact it was GPT, and we all know that AI sucks. So my name is Daniel Cuthbert. I am a creaky old hacker coming into my half a century soon, and I've kind of seen the evolution of something that impacts us all. And Maxine touched upon it, I think Jonny is, and everybody does here, and it's that of bugs. And bugs have kind of been my world. I started hacking in 1994, and they've made me build this industry and the career, and mostly from effectively destroying things. Now, the life cycle of a bug has always fascinated me. This was the first ever computer bug. It was found in 1947. One of the relays wasn't working. When the engineer went down, this was actually why the relay wasn't working. So when you hear the term bug, this is where it came from. This was the start. Now, in my role as head of research for a large bank, I also get to see the impacts of bugs. I also sit on the Blackout Review Board, and I was arrested for hacking, and now, for some weird, odd reason, I sit on 3 government advisory boards, which is a bit ironic, and I've also helped change the law that persecuted me for hacking. So we've also had a life cycle of change and growing up and becoming more mature, or as my wife says, she's got 3 kids because I'm still incredibly immature. But our industry is fascinating, right? Because we have this fascination with bugs and how bugs can impact stuff. Or I'm not going to call them bugs anymore. I'm going to call them what the San Bernardino district attorney called them, the lying dormant cyber pathogens. Because that's what they are, right? Actually, this was when one of the terrorists used an Apple iPhone, and basically they couldn't get into it because Apple decided to do something right with security, and they actually needed a friend of mine for an exploit that cost $2.7 million to gain access to the phone. The problem was bugs became a big industry, and I've likened it to the Lord of War's opening scene. Has anybody ever seen that movie? Nick Cage's amazing thing, basically a Lord of War. And for a very long time, that scene resonated with me because it starts off with the life cycle of how a bullet is made. from how it's cast and smelted, all the way through the casing, how it's shipped, eventually loaded into a gun and put through some poor sod's head. Bear with me. The what, the how, and the why that we have with bugs is incredibly similar. And this is kind of where my world came in. So, you know, when people think of computer security research, we tend to think, well, most people think it's like this, right? And this is me trying to get Outlook working properly on a normal day, or AI, as everybody's playing with at the moment. The reality is our industry is really boring, right? I've been fortunate enough to work on a lot of movies, and the directors will always say, make hacking glamorous. The last one we did, we worked with Mel Gibson's son, Milo, and we did a lot of hacking scenes, and we did fairly cool things. We did implants, we did full spectrum surveillance, we did active offense, and the director was like, it's very boring. I was like, Christ, that's hacking. Like, you go into any research, it's people clicking on stuff going, why isn't that pip installing? Jesus Christ, why can't I get anything doing? But the reality is, the other side of the industry has kind of glamorized a really ugly part of our world. We've given names and mascots and cool terms to the fact that criminals are exploiting the crap out of bugs to do really bad things to nice people. And I think this is where myself and a few others in the industry have finally said, this is not cool anymore. People are throwing money at me. I like this. Hang on, it's a ring. This is Jesus. I don't know if it's different in Scotland, but I don't know what that means, but I'll leave that there. Whew, you've thrown me. Thank you. But I want to step back to the early days, right? So I started finding bugs when we jumped on pre-World Wide Web, and I know that makes me sound incredibly dated, but actually there was no World Wide Web when I started hacking. And we did the thing of found something, looked at it, understood how it worked. There was no YouTube, there was no books. I sound like my old man talking about when he was going to school in the Midlands, backwards, upside down, and through snow with no shoes on. But we learned and we built, and we wrote exploits using Perl, because that's what we did back then. And we shared those exploits with friends, and we broke into stuff. And then we swapped and we traded, and the industries grew up, and hacking groups grew up. EL8, TISO, ADM, WooWoo, all the old names of groups that were people were finding bugs and sharing bugs and doing that kind of stuff. And it all kind of culminated in like a period where anybody in the mid to late 90s will tell you it was a very ugly time in the part of the internet because it wasn't nice. Stuff was being broken into at a large scale. We were all scanning and finding stuff, but the reality was people weren't really using the internet. But what did happen was EL8 was a fairly cool hacking crew. They kind of were the forefront of seeing the damage that was coming from the computer security industry that was coming. And they came out with a thing called Project Mayhem. This was not the Fight Club one, this was kind of similar. But basically, through a series of zines, with the time we had FRAC and everything else, they kind of called out the fact that BugTrack, which was an early mailing list, was facilitating an industry and a consortium of script kiddies. Now, the term script kiddies came about from about that time where we saw people taking proof of concept exploit code that was shared on BugTrack and just using it willy-nilly to do stuff on the internet. So this was 1999, not much has changed. But they were right in saying that actually what we were doing was arming a bunch of people that were doing damage. It never really kicked off because it was very much the early days. And indeed, we did write stuff. I mean, here's some of my exploit. I wasn't lying. I was writing exploit in Perl because Perl, as you know, is, excuse my French, throw shit at a wall and hope it sticks. So it's perfect at doing exploit code. But we did it. We found bugs. We found stuff. Interestingly enough, the exploit code that you see for the Apache Scalp vulnerability, we were very aware when we were writing this code that some people might be using that they shouldn't do. So we actually backdoored the shellcode. So when it did a reverse shell to their server, I also got a reverse shell myself. Rule number 1 of Fight Club, always check the stuff that you're running. And even today, threat intelligence people pull stuff off GitHub as a proof of concept and run it. I'm like, that's a bad thing. But, you know, we were building stuff and finding bugs, and, you know, it was a fascinating time. And then I did something which it was interesting because, if you look at the names there, you'll see Theodore, Doug Song, Jonathan Wu Wu. Doug Song, a very good close friend of mine, he recently sold his company to Cisco for $3 billion. There's a theme you'll notice here that I'm crap at business because all my other friends are now incredibly rich. So we had this problem. We had lots of bugs. We had lots of exploits, right? So myself and a friend called Govboy did what you did in the late 90s, and we built a site called hack.coza. Hack.coza was the first ever exploit site. We shared exploits openly. We were young. Please don't judge me. You can keep on throwing rings at me, but don't judge me. All right? And we gave away exploits, right? Because they weren't worth anything, right? They were just bits of C, assembly, Perl. Some idiots were writing in Ruby, but they're weird. And you did that. Now, that box was interesting. At the time, I was working for PSINet, building a big chunk of the core internet. Hosting fees were really expensive, so I hid it on one of the boxes at PSINet, hoping nobody noticed. Also, at the same time, I built a very small thing called Smoothwall. Does anybody remember Smoothwall here? Wow. Smoothwall was a firewall that we built, turn of the century. We did it because we were tired of the really expensive firewalls, so we said, let's open source a firewall. And it was a great way of building stuff, but there was also bugs, right? Again, we had a bug in OpenSSH. That IP address there, that was one of the hidden boxes in PSINet, because again, we couldn't afford hosting, so I just hid it inside PSINet with no DNS, because nobody would know how to do that. But the part is that the scene was now growing. There was a big buzz in bugs, and you had the normal shout-outs. I found a bug. These are the cool people. Hey, you over there, you suck, that kind of stuff. Nothing sinister. Until CVE 2002 came out. 2002 was an interesting time. CVEs were just out, and this was the Apache Scalp vulnerability, a chunked encoding vulnerability, the exploit that I wrote. Now, what was interesting about this was that Internet Security Systems, Chris Ruland and co., the experts, the threat intelligence experts at the time, deemed that the vulnerability was not exploitable. Right? The experts looked at it and they said, don't worry about this, it's not. Which caused a massive stir with three amazing friends who are called Gobbles. Gobbles had enough and they said, you know what, screw you all, we're going to write a multi-staged, multi-payload exploit that effectively wreaked a lot of havoc on the internet at the time, because there was no patch. There was no patch from Apache. And Apache Nosejob was a great bug, and for me it started to set the scenes as to the way the world of the sinister bug was kind of changing. Now, I left the UK after my arrest and moved to Thailand, where a bunch of other hackers did. And one of those persons was a very good friend of mine called the Gruk, and we lived together. The Gruk did what the Gruk did. He became the Lord of War. So this was circa 2004, 2005. And he became the middleman, the Nick Cage of bugs, where effectively, because everybody knew the Gruk, and the Gruk knew all the exploit writers, including all of us, who now saw that giving away bugs for free was a really stupid business idea. Because at the time, you could get 250, 300K, no questions asked, for a Android or iOS ODay. You could get a lot more for iOS and so. So Gruk acted as the middleman to move money around from governments who were buying bugs, but didn't want to gain access to people that were selling the bugs, because it was a bit of a weird anomaly, right? And he came up with a great system to say, you know what, bugs get burnt, bugs get fixed. So what we'll do is we'll do it in like an escrow way. You give us $1 million, I'll give you the exploit, and I will release the money to the bug person in drips and drabs so that the bug doesn't get burnt. And it worked for a very long time until he was an absolute moron and did an interview with Forbes. What really screwed it up was the bag of Thai cash in the pub that we used to go to, and he was wearing Vibram 5-finger shoes. Like, what the fuck are you doing, dude? That kind of made us stop. Problem was that pushed it underground. But what happened after that was a really, really ugly stage. We started to see a big rise in the global surveillance industry. Surveillance and interception has been my world for a very long time, and it's nothing new, right? Julius Caesar put together a great group of people to do surveillance, right? They moved around secret messages. That was the start of doing secret stuff. During the French Revolution, Maximilien Robespierre they had a fairly active surveillance capability, and they had a 12-member committee of surveillance, right? And they were authorized to monitor and arrest anyone suspicious. Sounds pretty cool. Then you had the really, really trendy East Germans, who had the best decisors in the world. I loved the whole Stasi thing, not that they were very good, but their decisors and their OPSEC manual was always something that I was laughing about. But they built together this whole surveillance capability, made useful with looking at ways of exploiting certain bugs. Now, if you look at surveillance, like it's moved from the old, human type stuff into interception of messages, so letters and so on, interception of telephone calls. Then we started to move into computers, we started to move into the mobile world, and now we have geolocation. This industry thrives on bugs. It needs bugs. It needs vulnerabilities in the products that we all use. You know, if you look at the who are around Huawei and the fact that they had backdoors when Cisco themselves have also got backdoors. Now, unfortunately, this week has been a really bad week for bugs. I don't know if everybody's keeping track. There have been 7 O-days patched this week alone. 2 for Microsoft. Microsoft's having a bit of a bad time. 2 from Apple. Interestingly, the Apple bugs retailed for $10 million a piece. These are not being used by anybody. So when people say, oh, I'm going to be targeted by iOS O-Day, no, you're not. I'm sorry, not of that kind of money. Cisco, really bad one. Adobe, we're used to Adobe. They couldn't write secure software if they tried. And a few others, right? So a bit of a bad time. But the problem is, these bugs are being now leveraged by a big global complex to gain access to data. And it's kind of meant that technology has now allowed us to spy on anybody. And a good friend of mine who's ex-intelligence, Kenneth Gears, came up with a term that I've loved for a long time. It's a golden age of espionage in terms of stealing information. And it really is. How many of you here use an ad blocker? A couple. How many of you are aware that the ad tracking network is far more pervasive and powerful than any of my friends at the NSA, CIA, or GCHQ? Phenomenally powerful industry that exploits bugs and keeps track of you. In fact, now if I want to learn anything about you, I go to a data broker and I buy data from your mobile phone. And I buy data from the apps, like App Measurement and Segment.io and all the other apps. These are all exploiting bugs in how mobile operating systems work. And we've kind of come into a world where I did art history when I started. There was no computer science degree as such. Jeremy Bentham in 1791 came up with the panopticon. The panopticon is the ideal jail, where all the cells are open, you have a single place where a guards person can look at all the people, and there's no such thing as privacy. I have built systems that mimic the panopticon, that look at data collection and data surveillance. The panopticon is where we're at, and that's why we've started to see frameworks built with the panopticon in mind appear. So the infamous hacking team, thank God for Phineas Fisher. Hacking team was kind of the first time we saw a morphing of exploit frameworks, like HD when you wrote Metasploit, don't know why I chose Ruby, but weirdo, into a tool that governments and oppressive governments can now use to do really bad things. Now, Hacking Team and Galileo was interesting how they build it. They were deeming we believe that fighting crime should be easy. We provide effective, easy-to-use defensive technology to the worldwide law enforcement and intelligence communities. Reality was they were selling it to any despot dictator who had enough money to go after normal people without any due course or legal jurisdiction. And it sounds very familiar today if you talk about NSO Group. But when I was running another company called SensePost, we were an offensive arm, we gained access to Hacking Team, and we reverse engineered it. And 2 things we liked. Prior to that, running a bug or an exploit chain was either a clunky mismatch of bash scripts or Perl or Python or something else, and maybe if they were weird, a PHP front end, right? It was a hacking tool as such. What Hacking Team did was 2 things. One, they used Adobe Air, which put the weirdness aside. You're like, oh, this has got an interface now. There's a UX experience, right? It also meant that operators who might not be computer security people could launch and leverage bugs against an entire population without knowing what the hell they were doing, because the interface really, really worked well. And this was a big defining moment for me. They also allowed you to completely abstract yourself from actually knowing what the hell you were doing when it came to bugs. You could do proper reverse shells, you could do cloaking, you could do all the kind of stuff that we were doing for a long time, but it was in a fancy interface. You're like, whoa, you're now basically giving AK-47 to your grandmother. And it was really, really effective. Hacking team weren't the nicest of people. They were selling to some really, really dodgy countries. So it was right, but they did get nailed. But the reality is that was the waterfall of all lawful intercept tools. So 4 years ago, I did a bit of research where I started to look at how big was the lawful intercept world? How big was this world that capitalized on bugs? Bugs in vendor products, bugs in software, bugs in everything. There are 120 companies offering lawful intercept across the planet, right? Then are the big names that you think of. And I helped build a tool called Maltego because I like to snoop on people. So I thought, I'm going to run it through. I'm going to map out the global surveillance network. This is what the global surveillance network looked like in 2018. A lot of companies, a lot of capabilities, a lot of countries, all selling some form of exploitation of a bug. Now, what was interesting is that they all suffer from the same thing that the vendors suffer from. They were really crap at building secure software. So it means you could now exploit the lawful intercept people because they were really bad at building stuff. And also, they had all their eggs in a single basket. Like, security is really hard. So is security architecture. But this kickstarted a massive industry. Now, right now in London is a conference called DSEI. Has everybody ever heard of DSEI? Thank you. DSEI is like, think of it as Disney World for spooks. All right, it's the only place in the world where there's 3 layers of security. It's invite only. It's in the Docklands. They have all the weapons on display. Do they have tanks? Do they have all the stuff? Planes, rockets. You can literally go up and you will see large numbers of military people walking around in their uniforms, chatting, saying, I like that tank, 50,000 police. No, they don't have the Russians anymore, that'd be bad. The Ukrainians are different. But, you know, we've now got this industry where you can buy full surveillance capability that exploit bugs and do everything. When I was last there, they were selling a full 2G, 3G interception backpack for 65,000 that the operator could wear. My initial thoughts were that child is never going to have kids, right? Because you've got that much power near your private part, GB fried forever. But hey, soldiers are expendable, right? The reality is that we've now got this big monster all piling on the bug world. And it's really hard to talk about bug world without talking about the baddies in the room. NSO, they're just a cancer. There is no other word for it. They are an absolute cancer. They're an effective cancer. The last bugs that Apple just fixed were exploited by NSO Group. We are now talking big money. And they're very good at what they're doing. This was an SMS sent to the head of Mexico's anti-sugar committee. Mexico, I don't know if you've ever tried Mexican Coke, not the white stuff, the stuff in the brown. It is amazing, right? It is very good, but it's full of sugar, right? Mexico realized they had a really big problem with obesity, and it was the fact that sugar was everywhere, so they set together a task force to eradicate sugar from Mexican diet. Sounds amazing, right? The reality was there were certain people in the sugar industry who didn't like that. So they made use of NSO's capability to send exploits onto the people involved in changing the law. And this is one of the SMSs. For those who can't understand Spanish, basically the person saying, like, your daughter was involved in an accident, you need to come do something, click on a link. Like really basic phishing, right? But basic phishing that works really, really well. So we've now started to see weaponizations of bugs moving from just the giggle stage, the break-in stage, to actively targeting to people. And I think that's where I started to see a big difference. And also with the experiences I've had finding bugs. The nerds have inherited the earth. Just wanted to let everybody know that. At school, people would say, you're never going to amount to anything. I'm like, all my nerd friends are running stuff. But the reality is that we now have big players messing around with politics and bugs. And, you know, we've got the Saudis who love to cut people up with bone saws, and we've got NSO Group. But then we have more sinister political things with the likes of North Korea. There was a lovely report yesterday that North Korea stole, I think it was 45 million from another Web3 wallet by mistake. Like, crime does really pay. And Lazarus Group and the entire complex of North Korea earning money with bugs is pretty phenomenal. But for me, I had a bit of a come to Jesus moment. Mid-November 2017, we found a vulnerability in Microsoft Exchange. We were going through the responsible disclosure. Microsoft, in true fashion, said it was a feature, not a bug. So, been there many a time. We wrote a tool called Ruler. Has anybody here ever used Ruler before? Ruler was phenomenal. Basically, we could send a specially crafted email to an Exchange server to add a rule to Microsoft Exchange that allowed us to ignore the secondary payload that could then do full compromise of the domain. All right, cool. A good series of bugs, right? We did the responsible disclosure of the exploit code in the framework because it wasn't being fetched. Unfortunately, Iran decided to use it, which was very much an awkward moment because our bugs were now being used to hurt other people. That was the first time. The second time, in 2012, I built a framework called Snoopy. Snoopy exploited a vulnerability in Wi-Fi. All of you have got my code now. Who here has got an Android and iPhone above Android 8 or iPhone 7? So you'll have my patch in your phones. We found a way to do mass surveillance of people using Wi-Fi, using beacons, where we could understand your pattern of life. And we did the first demo at Black Hat USA, and I said to Ping at the time, listen, I want to do some active exploitation of people. And they're like, you're at Black Hat. Like, if you're coming to Black Hat and you get your Wi-Fi turned on, crack on, buddy. So we did. We caught 70,000 people. Went to Apple and Android. Ironically, Apple refused to acknowledge the bug. They secretly patched it in iOS 8. We broke it again in iOS 9. Google, on the other hand, were phenomenal. We worked with the Android team, and we fixed it. The problem is that we later learned that a number of criminal groups were using Snoopy in a criminal manner to gain access to people and their data. That completely stopped all my outbound research. Since Snoopy and Ruler, I have not released any proof of concept exploit code. I rarely release any tools anymore because I've started to see how my bugs are now impacting people. And it worried me a lot because if we start to look at how prolific bugs are in our industry, we start to look at things like Sys's Kev. And Sys's Kev, for me, is our mirror of the industry. So what's amazing, what Jen Easterly and team are doing at Sys is to say, right, you know what? We need to get vendors to do more, right? Because 2002, Mark and I started this small little thing called OWASP because we were tired of the fact that web applications weren't very good. And ironically, we thought we'd fix web application security by 2006. OWASP turned 22 the other day. So CISA came out with that Kev, and they said, right, you know what? We're going to shame vendors now and put their name on a website, a government website, to say, like, your code and your applications, your products are being exploited. Fix it, right? This was a worry because I checked the other day. We're about to hit 1,000 products listed in Kev. So something's not working, right? We're finding more and more bugs every day. More and more vendors are getting hit, and something is breaking. And it sparked a lot of debate in the industry. So two very good friends here, two polar opposites. Aziria, I've just finished writing a book with her on ARM exploitation. She is a phenomenal hacker. She came out in 2019 saying responsibly disclosed bugs published with proof of concept are doing more harm than good since they're being weaponized and used by attackers. Now, this is probably where it's going to split the room. Anybody agree with this? A couple of people. On the flip side, Maddie Stone, another really good friend of mine, she's part of Google Project Zero. This woman eats bugs for breakfast. She is a prolific bug hunter. She said, actually, no. Providing proof of concepts has defenders more than attackers. Who agrees with that? Is everybody keeping like quite mellow here? You can see both sides. And if you look at the threat intelligence industry, they will go through now and trawl GitHub. They'll look for proof of concept. They'll run the code to understand how the attack is working. But the attackers are doing the same thing. Because back in '99, we were backdooring code. We were changing code. So it's very much a cat and mouse game. And I think this is where we come almost hit at crossroads, and that's where I'm starting to look at you all, right? Because we're all cool nerds, yeah? What we need to do now is we need to start going up to vendors, and there's a lot of vendors in the vendor hall, and start asking them, what are you actually doing to make your product secure? Not to make us secure, make your product secure. Because part of my day job is still tearing apart products for a large bank, finding bugs and reporting responsible disclosure. And what I'm seeing with a lot of these products is stuff that hasn't changed from when I was a lot younger and a lot thinner. So I think it's now up to us as people buying these products, especially security products, which seem to be hurt more than more, to ask them, what are we doing to stop big names becoming part of the problem? This week, Cisco admitted their VPN, and last time I checked notes, a VPN is there to make things more secure, right? Has a serious vulnerability that's being exploited by ransomware groups. I'm like, give me a frigging break, right? Help us out a little bit. And this is just not an isolated case. So what are we doing the other side? Well, like I said, I work a lot with government now. One of the things that I'm quite proud of is a new piece of legislation that's hopefully going through called Secure by Design. We needed a stick. Now, I can't believe I'm standing here as a hacker, as somebody, a miscreant, as somebody who's like building and breaking stuff, to say we do need some kind of regulation. The reality is we need the threat of regulation. We need people to know that you can no longer sell and ship products that you knowingly know are insecure. We wouldn't expect it with a car. We wouldn't expect it with the seat that you're sitting on. So why do we willingly let vendors ship products that are woefully insecure but charges a large amount of money? And this is where the Secure by Design comes in. There are plenty of other initiatives, but I think my parting comment to you would be is I need the industry more aggressive and asking more questions to the people that we're buying kit from to say, enough's enough, what are you doing to smash the bugs? So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. By the by, please don't throw money at me. I prefer the Armenian wedding approach. If you wait till lunchtime and just pin large denomination notes to my clothes, that would be my preference. Our third speaker this morning is Jonny De Silva, Solutions Engineer for SentinelOne, and Jonny's going to talk us through the threat research arm of their organisation. So, Jonny, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Always very difficult to follow Daniel as a vendor. You're pleased to know as well that Maxine's news of a rise in security spending means you'll be well prepared for my 30 slides on what we've got to sell you from SentinelOne this week. No, only joking, only joking. I'm here to talk to you today actually about an arm of SentinelOne that you may not be aware of. We have an arm called Sentinel Labs, and Sentinel Labs are there to really drive research for us as a vendor, and that can be research that we then present to you as cybersecurity professionals, or research that drives the development of our products and to make sure that they are as secure as possible and give you the defenses that you need. And hopefully I'll give you some key takeaways as well from the information that we found recently in the wild. So what I've got here is a quote from Security in 2023. And this actually comes from the Verizon DBIR report. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. And it's a pretty generic statistic, I think. It actually starts with 74% of threats emerge from an individual, identity being the problem. 83% of breaches are from external actors. They're financially motivated, financially driven. That is nothing new for us as cybersecurity professionals. This is stuff that's been around for 10 years. We know this, but we're still seeing the same sort of issues proliferate in the wild. So what can we do differently? What can we do to help mitigate this? What can we do to change the way that we act and stop these breaches happening? So how do we think like an attacker to level up our security? Well, at SentinelOne, and as a vendor that's specializing in research, we sort of have a different point of view to individual organizations. We have an incredible amount of data that comes from our product that gives us an overall sort of global viewpoint, a wide lens, if you will, into the current threat landscape. And this research is then used in a number of different ways that both sort of drives, as I said, our product development, but also externally through a number of different resources. So if you think of information security, it's sort of constantly changing, it's very iterative. There's a lot of noise out there, and actually sort of distinguishing that noise and being able to focus on one thing is key. Okay. There we go. So who are Sentinel Labs as a group of individuals? Well, we sort of have about 10 people within the organization, and they're specialists in different areas, and that really gives us an advantage. So we have experts in threat hunting, experts in malware reverse engineering, experts in exploits, and they all come together to give us this sort of global lens and help us focus our roadmap, if you will. We specialize in ATPs, and it's across a wide range of platforms. We are an endpoint technology and endpoint solution, so Windows, Mac, Linux, cloud technologies, espionage. That is how we sort of focus our research. We've also recently invested in AI leadership and have a new sort of AI arm intrinsically built into the company. And that is both from the perspective of understanding what future risks AI poses, but also how we can use that AI and leverage AI in our own sort of defensive mechanisms within the product. Sentinel Labs essentially embodies an open community, an open part of us as a vendor, where we want to provide you with tools, context, insights to essentially strengthen the collaboration from research within the industry. Now, this is a key component for anybody that wants to publish their own research or is thinking of being involved in threat intelligence. And Maxine made a key point of this, and it's how do we create trust? Cybersecurity is fundamentally built on trust, and in a world full of disinformation and misinformation, having a trusted source where we can take action, where we can see clearly through the fog, is incredibly important. And so it's vital for us to foster that trust within the community. And we've got sort of three key pillars that we follow to help us do that. Sorry. So they are becoming a source of expertise, and I'll expand on this in more detail, aiming for strategic repetition, and taking a stand on relevant issues. So how do the team conduct their research? Well, this is probably pretty self-explanatory. Unfortunately, there's no sort of secret source to doing this. We have one significant advantage to other organizations, and that is the amount of data that our researchers have access to. And that data comes from the feedback, global product feedback. So we are an endpoint solution. We have millions and millions of data points collected every day based upon suspicious activity, malware detections, and system behaviors. Now, the team uses a combination of proactive threat hunting, sort of private and proprietary techniques, and advanced technologies that sort of maps the path between that data, and that leads into sort of where we will begin research. We'll look for patterns in that data. We'll look if we can attribute it to any sort of particular threat actor, and then we'll provide that information with recommendations back to the community. We do things like malware reverse engineering, as you'd expect, looking at the sort of functionalities of malware, and again, publishing information around that. But we also use typical open source intelligence, right? So our threat researchers will read blogs from other researchers, other voices within the community. We'll take their research and foster it and build upon that in our specialization. We'll use other publicly available sources, blogs, social media, but we also have sort of a platform where we collaborate with other industry groups as well as government organizations and research bodies. So that first point, becoming a source for expertise, that is really important for how we sort of generate trust. For us to maintain trust, we understand that we need to be delivering information consistently in an expert level for individuals within our field. So this involves sharing regular blog posts, insights, having quarterly discussions, conferences where we give you up-to-date information. And we consistently post these, providing you with IOCs as well as mitigations and advice so you can actually use that data in the wild and understand again if it's relevant to your organization. We also aim for strategic repetition. And what do I mean by strategic repetition? I mean that we want to reinforce the message that we're trying to deliver. We want to get our voice wider than just the small community that we necessarily have in this room or who follow endpoint security. So we leverage the use of other journalistic means. We reach out to media associations. We want players with a wider reach, a bigger audience, people that are outside of cybersecurity with mainstream appeal to also reference and use our data. And they're only going to use that if it's reliable, if it's trusted, and if it's relevant. Repetition ultimately helps reinforce that message, as I said, and an understanding with the audience. And if we can improve those concepts, those techniques, hopefully it's going to lead to a more sort of secure world. The final part is one that many wouldn't consider when you're looking at sort of how we foster trust, and that is taking a stand on relevant issues. Now, this could be in a few different ways. This could be advocating for stronger cybersecurity measures. It could be, calling out lax security practices, as we discussed. Is finding bugs good for the industry? And it could be supporting certain types of legislation. Again, a lot of people in security don't like more controls, but legislation is there for a reason. And it also means taking a slight sort of geopolitical stand, which many organizations would tend to sort of avoid. And that can be standing for justice, being a force for good, and ultimately being on sort of choosing a side in this battle, if you will. Now that can lead to implications commercially. You can't work in certain geo-regions. You lose all of that business opportunity. And for our threat researchers, that also means they need to be aware that they're going to be on the books of these potential nation states. They're going to know who these individuals are and the risks that are associated with that. So hopefully that's some insight into who Sentinel Labs are. Now, as part of this presentation, I asked the team to give us some examples of what they've seen recently in the wild and how we can mitigate those and what recommendations they would give to you as cyber defenders. We generally track a wide range of APTs and crime actors. I think we're sitting at roughly over, 200 different actors that we track globally, as well as others that fall outside of our remit for attribution and piecing that all together. So we split this generally as an endpoint solution technology into Windows, Linux, crimeware, Mac, espionage, and cloud-based security. So on the Windows, Linux, and Mac ecosystem, what we're starting to see is more and more ransomware and crimeware actors extending the programming languages that they utilize to reach more platforms. So we're seeing malware being written in Go, in Rust, in Python. And the sort of significance of that is they're trying to expand the remit and the destruction that they cause if they enter your environment. If you think about it, if they just compromise your Windows estate and you haven't got a huge Windows environment, how heavily are they going to be able to exploit you? How are they going to be able to demand ransom? And so there's a conscious effort from the threat actors to cover all sort of services and platforms that you may utilize as an organization. That extends into the reuse of code. And so we're seeing a lot of actors bolt together new ransomware code that takes old snippets and uses that to target platforms such as hypervisor technology. We also focus on an area we call market and services. So this could be clear web or dark web, sort of malicious services, and we monitor those services. One of them you may be familiar with is a sort of prolific website called Breach Forums. That's recently re-emerged. Breach Forums is actually on the clear web and is sort of a well-renowned marketplace for selling data leaks. Telegram, I'm sure you're all familiar with Telegram. Telegram essentially still remains the Wild West when it comes to selling cybersecurity services and selling sort of data that's come from these breaches. On the theme of marketplaces, we also see a conscious effort and a continued effort to mash together code that can be used to bypass and exploit what we would call tier 1 and tier 2 XDR and EDR solutions. So some of these tools are often more robust than others. They can be particularly effective against more traditional solutions, but generally what we see with more modern technologies is there's a positive flip side of that, and that if you have behavioral techniques in place and behavioral insight in your EDR, then we'll capture these sort of mismatched together functionalities. We're also seeing ransomware payloads come with new functionalities and new modules. So the ability to actually control granularly how they're encrypting or wiping in your environment. And again, that's designed around the idea of being able to pivot dynamically during a negotiation or during an exploitation, and we're just seeing a lot more flexibility in how they can control that sort of malware and the commodity malware. The final point there on Windows, Linux, and Mac in the ecosystem is actually the expanding attack impact. And what I mean by that is how extortion techniques are used differently in the wild. What we're starting to see is not just one victim being targeted, so maybe they go after the CISO or someone as part of a ransom, but we're seeing that intimidation spread to direct phone calls to other executives in the C-suite. It could even be their personal family members. We're seeing phone calls being done directly to other individuals related to those individuals, all to increase that pressure and increase that extortion on that organization. We're also seeing a thing called comment spam happening as part of this exploitation tactic. So if you're an organization that has, for example, a public-facing website, somewhere where you can leave reviews or comments, we're seeing those comments being hit by spam bots, again, where they deliver those ransomware notes, those extortion notes, so that it's widely sort of in the public eye. Moving on to Mac. Mac is often seen as slightly more of a secure operating system and maybe left to the side when we look at reviewing our environments. And that is true to a certain extent. In terms of ransomware, we don't really see much ransomware cropping up on Mac. I think, for example, this year we've only really seen a few examples of proof of concept code, and nothing that's really sort of been actively used very heavily in the wild. What is prolific on Mac is the actual use of info stealers. And there's been a significant improvement on Mac in the way that info stealers are used and the way that they're delivered to the victims. The functionality is still vastly the same, but what is different, as I said, is the way that they're delivered. So if we take Mac Stealer, some of you may be familiar with Mac Stealer or heard of the piece of malware previously. That was essentially almost impossible to install. You wouldn't end up with it on your endpoint unless you intentionally meant to do so. What that has matured into is a bit of research that someone in our team did recently called Atomic Stealer, and again, the way that is delivered is much more sophisticated. So that piece of malware is actually, the binaries are being bundled into legitimate cracked software, and that software is then being advertised using Google Adverts and typo squatting domains to appear legitimate. So individuals will go to find this piece of software, click on the first link on Google, will download what they think is legitimate, and it will contain those malware binaries inside of it. There's also been evidence more of social engineering being used to leverage Mac malware, so people being contacted through LinkedIn, Twitter and stuff, where they are then coerced into downloading this malicious sort of malware. There's some key takeaways when it comes to info stealers that our researcher provided, and that is around how you monitor your logs. And there's sort of 3 key commands that you can see in your logs that are described there. So really, if you check your sort of typical PS logs for OSA script-E or display dialogues or with hidden answers, you'll be able to find sort of evidence of these info stealers within your environment. So we then also focus on the cloud side, so cloud security. Generally, the cloud space was largely dominated by crypto mining. I'm sure you're all familiar with crypto mining, but we're now seeing more of a proliferation into credential theft in the cloud space. And that is not just across the sort of typical platforms. That is pretty much anything that is internet-facing, that exists in the cloud, that could be misconfigured. So I'm talking Kubernetes, Docker, Jupyter. We're seeing all of those platforms being targeted equally. We've also seen threat actors moving to target something new, which is minimal containers. I don't know if you're all familiar with minimal containers, but essentially containerized architecture that has been stripped back. It's had components removed that limits its capabilities, designed to improve efficiency. So common functionalities and tools and packages that may exist within normal containers don't necessarily exist within minimal containers. To bypass that, what this code actually highlights here is a threat actor has built a function that uses an HTTP request to then install the curl binary, which can then, of course, be leveraged to deliver a number of additional payloads. The other side of cloud is one that's been around in the industry for a while. And again, there's more that vendors need to do to stop the proliferation of this. And that is the use of legitimate services to hope malicious infrastructure. Now, that could be C2 infrastructure. It could be phishing websites. But the problem we have as defenders is you can no longer leverage the reputation of those services to protect yourselves. And traditionally, that was largely seen across AWS, Google, but we're now seeing more exploitation of Azure blob storage, as well as DigitalOcean droplets. So that's some insight into the current threat landscape. We have regular sort of quarterly webinars, which will give you much more of a deeper dive into these different areas if you want to stay up to date with the latest and greatest and what is happening. And as part of putting this conversation together, I asked individually the researchers in our team, what advice would you give the audience that I'm speaking to today? How can they actually take some proactive responses to help harden their environment? And you'll be disheartened to hear that there is no magic wand. I've got no silver bullet for you. We have an incident response arm as well, and largely the biggest security improvements that we would see are down to hygiene, good process, and best practice. Stuff that we've been preaching for tens, decades. The first one there, make patching a priority. Daniel highlighted this. There's so much POC code out there for bugs in the wild that if you're not patching, if you get a compromise, it's so easy to exploit something with your environment to laterally move to gain privilege. So please, please, please make patching a priority. You don't need to patch everything. Understand what is being exploited and prioritize that. The second point there is ensure your endpoint solution is properly configured and has insight across all platforms. And again, that comes from our experience as an incident responder, is it's really, really, really disheartening when you go into an incident response situation, you find an organization has taken the time to invest in these next generation tools, but they've then had overly aggressive exclusions or put something in that has allowed the threat actor to leverage a certain technique. Now, we're all beholden to the operations and the function of the business, but it's important that we try and leverage the technology that we've invested in there. What we also see is a lack of logs and configurations and auditing of logs. So basics such as turning on logging for PowerShell, it's a one-group policy, make sure you're doing that. And make sure you're retaining your logs for a period of time. In any sort of incident response situation, if you're only retaining your logs for 3-4 days, a week, we really, really can't help much there. That gives us not a lot of insight into the initial point of infection and what may have happened. So please, if you can, canvas to, again, increase your log retention. A cliched one there, but again, there's something that's iterated quite often. Knowing your crown jewels. We all as individuals, can sometimes feel like an impossible task to essentially defend your enterprise. So take that time to understand the risk profile, understand what your crown jewels are, prioritize those. That's a great starting point, and at least do your best to sort of identify and prioritize those. Another key one there is, yes, we've been preaching 2FA for a long time, but please, please move away, if you can, from the use of SMS and push notifications as part of 2FA. There's many sort of products available as a service around SMS-based attacks, and we've also seen some very high-profile cases around push notifications. So if you can, leverage a different mechanism for 2FA. One there for Max, so if you have got Max in your environment, make sure you're using an MDM solution. Without an MDM solution, essentially anyone on a Mac can use a system policy override, even end users without administration permissions. So it's key that you've got MDM so you can configure those policies to stop that sort of compromise of the devices. Finally, just some couple of things on the cloud. So the most sort of issues we see on the cloud are around the naivety with the new services that we're adopting. So it's important to understand how your services are configured when you deploy them, especially if they're public-facing. A lot of us are using new technologies that we're not familiar with, and we're seeing a number of breaches where there's just been a slight misconfiguration. So please review those. And the same for that is patching as well. Patching of those services is key and it's important. The final thing there is to evaluate the logging capabilities of your cloud provider. Again, this is through the adoption of new technologies and not necessarily understanding how they function or the licensing model, but we've been involved in incident response situations where we've gone in there and the individual organization assumes that they have that logging functionality, but we're actually in a slightly lower license where their cloud provider is not maintaining the logs for the retention they expect. And again, it leads back to the same sort of issues I described earlier. So hopefully that's provided you some insight into who Sentinel Labs are, how we function as a sort of research arm outside of the sort of general noise of the vendor space and promoting our products. If you'd like to know more about what we do and the research that we do, you can subscribe to our blog posts, you can come to our sort of quarterly webinars. You're welcome to ask me some questions after this call. If anyone is actually in threat research and is working on any interesting sort of developments, we do have what we call LabsCon, a function where you can submit your research and come and talk at one of our conferences if that is of interest. And otherwise, if you're looking to start threat intelligence for your organization, that's something that we can help you there as well. Please come and speak to me afterwards. Thank you very much for your time.
There's a chance now to ask questions of any of our first three speakers. You can do it just by sticking your hand up. We've got a couple of microphones live in the room. We'll come to you in a moment, sir. Or you can do it via Slido. I did wonder where that had gone. I suspect because the producers of this conference suspect I'm very close to death. I'm not allowed to use expensive equipment. We really need a small child to use it instead. But it's there on Slido. You can download the app, work away at it. So, can we get a microphone to that gentleman there in the stripy top? You had your hand up, sir. Can you stick your hand up again and just pass the microphone along? This is going to take a wee while physically because of the shape of the room.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you identify yourself for a start?
My name is Brian Carton. I work for Harper McLeod. Thanks, that was very interesting. I've got two questions here for Jonny and Dan. Jonny, I noticed when you were saying one of the attack vectors was coming through Google Ads, and it was just to get your opinion, why isn't Project Zero scanning them? It seemed one of those things. Second one for Dan, I was a Smoothwall user back in the early 2000s. Was there a backdoor in it?
I'm going to keep quiet. No.
Again, just the opinion of if people are using Google Ads, why is Project Zero not scanning them?
I think they are, but it's like anything. There's the sheer proliferation. Stuff zips through the net. The sophistication, it's not always easy for these things to be detected. They're very well put together, so it's more of an issue of volume and just something to be aware of.
I can probably add to that. I mean, I know the P0 team really well. They don't actually look at Google infrastructure. Google have got Red Team led by Rob Mann and others. The ad thing is interesting because it's really pervasive. If you look at a lot of the ads, they might not be pushing out malware per se. They might be doing legitimate tracking. And like I said in mine, that's the biggest problem, is that the tracking market is unregulated, it's uncontrolled, and it uses legitimate technologies. So how do you block that? Just to think, how many organizations block ads at the border? I've not met one in 30 years. We block people browsing websites, but we don't block ads. So you can see why it's an amazing attack vector, and I have used it well in the past.
Any thoughts on that, Maxine?
No, these are the experts.
Yeah, right, no problem at all. There was the gentleman just behind you, actually, who's had his hand up too. I mean, as in literally just behind. No, back a bit, there we go.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lionel Saliu. I work for a small company here called Encompass. I'm sure you've heard that quote before. The choice, if a user is given the choice between dancing pigs and security, they're going to choose dancing pigs every day and twice on Sunday. Is the solution to our problem of cybersecurity bug-free code? Is this even achievable?
Yes. So here's my argument back to you. Why is it that we blame the user for clicking on something that they should do? I should be able to click something and have it handled in a secure way. It's weird how we put the blame on the user going, oh, you used the Word document like Microsoft, what did you do? No. Microsoft knows that Office is a pig with lipstick, all right? They could quite easily fix it by removing a big chunk of the attack vectors that Jonny and his team find. But they don't, because the users and the organizations want Excel to have Python in it. What's the worst that's going to happen by putting, oh crap, here we go. So I think you can write bug-free code, and we do actually have examples. Anybody remember Qmail? Dan Bernstein's mail server, right? In the early days of the internet, you had a couple of mail servers. You had SendMail, if you liked S&M and WIPs, you generally ran a SendMail server because it was the same kind of experience, which was full of bugs, right? Or you ran QMail and you didn't have any bugs because Dan wrote it in a secure way and it became like the standard of how do you write code. He also put $1 million behind it, and to date there's not been a single bug in QMail. And mail handling is really complex because of the messes of different languages, different formats, encoding and so on. So you can write it. The reality is there's no demand from consumers to write it. You know, if we look at cars, right? I like Mercedes because I know I'm not going to die in a flaming ball of fire like I would do a Tata, right? And we go and buy stuff like that. We don't buy a toaster going, I might get shocked buying this. It's the consumers pushing that. We need consumers to have the kite mark for code security. So I think you can write it, there just needs to be demand.
Do you think, though, that some of this kind of, so you've reminded me there of a kind of OT security where safety comes first. Safety is absolutely first in OT security. And is that how we should be approaching IT from a security perspective?
Yeah, I think OT is interesting because you've got companies like Siemens who struggle with security and have done for a long time. But then again, you have the problem there where you can't easily upgrade it. Yeah. But I do think that, you know, as much as I hate on Apple, this is really hard to do this example these days when there's been O-Day out there. iOS used to be okay. But the good thing is, like now, if you plug in a device into your iPhone, it is not going to do stuff because of one person over a friend of mine in Cupertino. So they've made it more secure. But I think there needs to be a bigger drive, and that's what we're kind of expecting from the giants to kind of push that down.
On Slido, Ryan McCarthy is asking, what is more exploitable, Mac or PC?
They're both. I mean, I use a Mac. I know it's not secure. Like, it's just not. Yeah. I mean, the worst is Linux. Unpopular thing, but Linux is not that secure. So yeah, they all have issues.
It's interesting. Personally, I don't think Joe Public gives two hoots about cybersecurity. It's not my problem. It's somebody else's job.
Until it affects them.
It still affects them, yeah.
No, but they do care more when they're affected. Why didn't my bank, why didn't my whatever protect my data? We can all remember the TalkTalk breach from quite a few years ago now, and all of a sudden customers are up in arms, yet we still don't want to pay that much for, in those days, our broadband service or our whatever. And it's back to my point, it's viewed as a commodity. It's a really expensive commodity to deliver, and I do think people, they're caring more as they learn more about what the potential impact is, but I still don't think they're prepared to pay for it.
I agree, I second that. I think, you know, if we look at IoT security, which got a good kicking, and rightly so, right, it was insecure. The problem is that people wanted to have cheap IoT. I want to pay £3 for my ESP32 or 8266 board. I'm not paying any more. How in God's name do you expect anybody to put firmware security with that kind of margin? Like, it's never going to happen. You want cheap and sort of working, or do you want secure and good? There has to be that shifting point.
You made an interesting point in your presentation, Jonny, that, you know, basically old tools are being used nowadays to actually create new breaches and things like that, which makes perfect sense. Why would you reinvent the wheel unnecessarily? But what I'm looking at as a non-insider is we have this concept of the teenage geek, but we now have the reality of the middle-aged geek, you know, who started off as a teenage geek and has grown up through the system. Which has got the edge nowadays? Because the teenage geek is looking at it with fresh eyes, but the middle-aged geek's been around the block dozens of times.
It's an interesting question. I don't think there is an edge either way. I think it's very hard to potentially put a persona behind the people that are targeting us. There's been many years of culminations of this type of code that you described. Some effective, some not so effective, some less effective. I think it's more, if you look at, it's not necessarily a technical advancement that's the scary thing, it's the business advancement of how threat actors work. It's the crime ecosystem that's behind it is the real issue. Before, yes, people shared a bit of code here, a bit here, there. There's a whole supply chain a malicious supply chain that now exists. So you have experts in doing one thing, selling to another guy who's an expert in doing another thing, who then passes it on to another guy who's an expert in doing another thing. So we've got to look at the whole ecosystem as a malicious business, because that's essentially now how it's run.
I mean, there's organised criminal groups. Daniel mentioned the Lazarus Heist, the Lazarus Group and the Lazarus Heist. If anybody wants to listen to that, if you haven't already, it's fantastic on BBC Sounds. That explains the, the sort of things that are going on in security. It's not, of course you get your script kiddies in bedrooms, in wherever, but it's so much more about nation states, organised criminal groups, and the whole ecosystem, as Jonny described. Ransomware as a service. They've got help desks. They've got everything that you could possibly need to run ransomware. So it's about a lot more than just kind of the individuals, I suppose.
Shona on Slido wants to know, and this is for Daniel, will secure by design make bug hunting obsolete, or will it just make bug hunting harder?
That's a very good question. I think we want to raise the bar to get rid of really lame bugs. When Mark, Rainforest Puppy, came out with SQL injection in '98, I was attacking Oracle. Mary Ann said Oracle was really secure, bless her. It wasn't. We genuinely thought the SQL injection would die a couple of years later. We still find SQL injection in applications, which frankly, that bug is old enough to drink in America right now. And that's not a good indication. I think what the secure by design thing looks at doing is to get rid of stuff like default passwords, which are easily exploited. Get rid of things where you're leaking timing issues or responses that allow people to brute force the device, which in turn allows, so it gets rid of that. So you effectively are making it more expensive for an attacker to target a device, and that's all we want to do. All right? The easiest thing, and it sounds horrible, is that when you're protecting an organization, you want the attacker to go to your competitor's organization, right? Go somewhere else, not us. And I think that's what we want to do with secure by design, just make it really, really hard to go after that device.
Okay, thank you for that. Any more questions on the floor? Gentleman there, please. We'll get a microphone to him. Very good for the presentation team, this. Lots of exercise.
Hi there. My name's Andrew. I work at Moody's. I had two questions. So first one was for Maxine. I was just curious about the population that the survey went out to in terms of industries and who exactly answered those surveys and regions and stuff like this, just to get an idea. That was question one. I have a second question about Huawei.
Okay, no worries, thank you. So there were 3 surveys. So I'm trying to remember all the numbers and all the regions in them. The Horizon survey, I'm pretty sure, was in 3 major regions, which were EMEA, Asia Pacific and North America. Likewise for the cybersecurity decision maker survey, we had roughly splits across all 3 the equal splits, I beg your pardon, so about 200 from each region for the decision maker survey as well. And then in terms of the regional splits for the big one, the IT Enterprise Insights, that's fully global. We break it down. I cannot remember the number of countries, but there are a lot of countries included in that. And then from an industry perspective, the first one was IT, of course, the Horizon survey. The second one covered a lot of different industries, but we did have quite a lot from FS, financial services, in there. And then, again, the big global survey was similar in industries. There are, dozens of industries that we cover in there.
And your second question.
That's helpful. Second question is maybe a bit harder to answer. On this whole thing around budget, how much do you think that awareness and education and risk tolerance has to do at like a board or executive leadership level when it comes to like giving out that budget or wanting to like support the cybersecurity teams? Because my background is this, right? So when I have an incident, it's almost like I get a blank check. But if I go first and say, we need to implement XYZ controls and it's going to cost X amount and here's the risk, it's like, no budget, it's hot, tough year. But it's just that. At the same time, they're ready to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars or maybe millions of dollars on insurance, on cyber insurance and things there. So it's kind of like, I guess your perspective on that would be great. Just whoever, really. Thank you.
Sure, it's a difficult one. And in the security decision maker survey that I mentioned, we asked the question about how much has a security incident cost you? And so many organisations, including smaller organisations, are ticked the $250,000 and above box. So there's a lot of that going on. So it's no surprise when you have that and you go to your board and say, I need some more money because it's cost us $250,000. Oh, yeah, here's another however much. So there is that, but I think there's nothing like the threat of jail to focus the mind. So that's why we're seeing more and more compliance coming in. And in the US, for example, you've got to declare in your I think it's SEC filings, that you know, these are the measures that you're taking for cybersecurity. And yeah, I mean, there's awareness, there's education. It's not just one thing that's going to fix the board's minds, but I do think that recognition that no organisation is secure is managing up, I suppose, isn't it? You're managing up, setting expectations. I'm not a fan of FUD, fear, uncertainty and doubt, at all. But if we can, you know, pitch it more around the innovation and the opportunities, if they are spending, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars on the new amazing, you know, gee whiz thing, then you've got to be able to support that with cybersecurity. Otherwise, you could be wasting your investment. So it's not a perfect answer, but lots of components.
Yeah, the one thing that crossed my mind when the presentations were going through was, you know, Walmart says, we are the most trusted. You put a tagline like that on it, you're painting a target on your back, essentially.
Well, I think they'd be painting more of a target if they said we're the world's most secure retailer, then yeah, you've got a big fat target on your back for that. But I think the trust piece it's really important. And for me, that shows that Walmart's recognised the need for the value. Exactly. That's not more than a need, it's the value of cybersecurity.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you to thank our first three speakers one more time, please? Thank you.